Marco Cruz never planned to build an empire from the ashes of humiliation. He just wanted to flip burgers with a purpose. The night everything changed. The rain fell like grease off an old skillet, thick and relentless, smearing the streets of New York with reflections of neon signs and half-dreams. Inside the cramped burger joint where he'd worked since he was 17, Marco could still taste the scent of betrayal, salted like the fries he'd served with a smile that barely hid exhaustion. He was 22 now, proud, broke, and hungry for more than a paycheck. That small burger shack had been his world. He had painted its walls, fixed its broken fryer, and brought in a sauce recipe his father once called the soul of flavor. It wasn't fancy, but customers loved it, came back for it, said there was something about the Cruz sauce that made even cheap beef taste like a celebration. Yet the same cousins who once laughed with him in that kitchen, who once promised to start a food brand together, now looked at him like he was disposable. They called him Kid, Dreamer, and when the boss, his own cousin Luis, fired him for thinking too big, the world felt colder than the refrigerator he used to clean at closing time. That night, Marco stood outside in the rain, apron in hand, shoes soaked through, hearing Luis say through the door, "Dreams don't pay rent, cousin." Reality does. He could have begged for his job, but something inside him hardened. He'd spent years flipping someone else's dream. It was time to flip his own. He walked 10 blocks to a 24-hour diner, ordered the cheapest coffee, and began scribbling ideas on a napkin, the first blueprint of what would become Shake Shack. He didn't even have a name yet, just words. Fresh beef only. Modern design, open-air kitchen, music and vibe. A place where people feel alive. He had no capital, no investors, only a beaten-up food cart license his father once used to sell hot dogs near Central Park. But that was enough. The next morning, Marco started walking from one supplier to another, negotiating for beef, buns, and sauce ingredients, charming them not with money, he had none, but with conviction. "I'll pay you when I make it," he said, "and I will make it." Some laughed, some ignored him, but one old butcher from Queens gave him a box of patties on credit. "Kid," the man said, "you got eyes like a storm. Don't waste that." That single act of trust lit something in Marco's chest that no amount of betrayal could extinguish. Within a week, he had an old cart he painted mint green, a grill that smoked more than it cooked, and a sign he hand-carved that read Shake Shack, because he wanted people to feel movement, energy, rhythm, like the world was shaking awake. He set up near Madison Square Park, a spot that seemed invisible to most vendors but alive to him, alive with possibility. The first day he sold only 9 burgers, the second 11, the third 32. It wasn't much, but every customer left smiling, often taking pictures, telling friends, "There's something about that kid's burger." He started offering free samples of his sauce, calling it Cruz Shake, and soon enough, his small line became a crowd. People waited under umbrellas talking about the vibe as much as the food. Marco played old rock music from a second-hand speaker and danced while grilling, because he believed that people didn't just eat food, they ate energy. They tasted effort, but success never comes without echoes of envy. Luis saw Shake Shack's name trending on social media within weeks. His old cousin, the Dreamer, was suddenly getting lines around the block. Rather than congratulate him, Luis tried to copy the recipe, opening a cheap knockoff stall 2 blocks away. He called it Cousin's Burger Bar. Marco didn't fight back with words. He fought back with flavor. He doubled down, experimenting through the night, mixing different cuts of meat, butter-toasted brioche buns, and a sauce that felt like nostalgia in a bite. His customers noticed. They became his marketers, his family, his proof that authenticity couldn't be faked. By month 3, he'd saved enough to rent a permanent kiosk. He stayed up 48 hours straight, painting the walls himself, hanging lights and writing a motto above the counter. Born in the grind. That line wasn't just decoration, it was truth. He posted his first ad online, a photo of a dripping burger with the caption, "Betrayal tastes better with cheese." It went viral. Within a week, hundreds showed up, drawn by the story as much as the food. The line curved around the park. Journalists came, influencers came, even Luis came, pretending to check out the competition. Marco served him without a word, just a small smile and an extra charred patty. That night, for the first time, Luis realized he hadn't fired a worker. He'd unleashed a competitor. But Marco wasn't satisfied. He knew one stall wasn't enough. He spent nights studying marketing on YouTube, business books at the library, and stories of brands like McDonald's, Starbucks, and Domino's. He mapped a strategy on his bedroom wall, expansion through experience. He didn't just want to sell burgers. He wanted to sell belonging. Every Shake Shack would have a playlist curated by local artists, interior designs that reflected the neighborhood, and a staff culture built on passion. He started training his small team personally, telling them, "We don't serve food, we serve fire. We serve dreams with ketchup on top." His charisma made them believe, even when money was tight. He invested in social media storytelling, posting his failures, burnt burgers, and behind-the-scenes chaos. People loved the honesty. They shared his journey, calling him the comeback cook, the revenge chef, the guy who turned rejection into flavor. By the end of the year, Shake Shack wasn't just a food cart, it was a movement. Investors came knocking, but Marco chose only one, a local restaurateur who believed in his vision, not his profit margin. Together, they opened the first official Shake Shack store in Manhattan. On opening night, there was a line that stretched 2 blocks, a DJ playing live, and Marco behind the counter, flipping burgers while tears shimmered in his eyes. He looked at the crowd, at the dream alive, and whispered to himself, "Reality does pay rent, Luis. It just pays me now." But deep down, he wasn't done. Success was sweet, but revenge, served hot between toasted buns, was divine. The following months were brutal. Competitors tried to copy him. Investors pressured him to scale faster, and Luis spread rumors that Shake Shack used frozen meat. Marco didn't fight with words. He filmed a raw video showing his team grinding beef fresh every morning. That transparency earned him loyalty money could never buy. When a food critic from the New York Times wrote that Shake Shack tastes like rebellion seasoned with purpose, the brand exploded. Marco hired his childhood friends, gave jobs to struggling chefs, and introduced a scholarship program for young cooks with dreams like his. Every decision he made tied back to the night he was fired, the night he promised himself to never let someone else define his worth. Still, Marco's revenge wasn't complete. One afternoon, a major franchise deal came across his desk, a proposal to open Shake Shack outlets in Dubai, London, and Sydney. To finalize it, he needed to present at a global food conference, hosted by none other than Luis, now running a failing restaurant group. Fate, it seemed, loved irony. As Marco walked onto the stage under the glaring lights, Luis sat in the front row, face pale. Marco's presentation wasn't just about burgers. It was about belief. He showed pictures of his first cart, his crew, his failures. He ended with a slide that read, "They fired me from their dream, so I built my own." The crowd erupted in applause. Luis couldn't lift his head. The conference streamed worldwide. Shake Shack's website crashed from traffic. Overnight, franchise requests poured in. That was the day Marco Cruz became a symbol, not of fast food, but of fast growth fueled by slow pain. He returned to Madison Square Park the next day, stood where his first cart had been, and whispered to the empty air, "Thank you for firing me." The city buzzed around him, unaware of the ghosts he'd buried under his success. He smiled, knowing that every betrayal, every rainy night, every insult had been a secret ingredient. Shake Shack wasn't just food, it was forgiveness grilled to perfection. And as he looked up at the skyline, glowing gold in the sunset, he knew this was only the beginning. The empire was real, but the hunger, that beautiful burning hunger, was forever. Marco Cruz thought success would silence the noise inside him. But the truth was louder than ever. The applause, the expansion, the cameras, none of it drowned the echo of that single night when he was told he'd never make it. The empire he'd built from scraps now glittered across the world, each Shake Shack glowing like a neon testament to pain turned into purpose. But inside, Marco still fought that invisible hunger, the one that whispered, "Don't get comfortable. Don't forgive too easily. Don't forget why you started." His story had become legend. The kid from the rain who turned rejection into fire. News anchors called him the Grill King. Magazines put him on covers with headlines like "From Fired to Famous," and yet, when the noise faded, he'd find himself staring at old photos. Him, his cousins, the dingy burger joint, the fryer grease splattered on the walls, and he'd feel that old ache flicker. Revenge had brought him glory, but it hadn't yet brought him peace. The turning point came one sleepless night in his Manhattan penthouse, where the skyline sparkled below like stars trapped in glass. Marco leaned over his balcony, coffee in one hand, phone in the other, scrolling through thousands of congratulatory messages, business offers, and franchise deals. But one message stopped him cold. Luis's Burger Bar files for bankruptcy. It was a simple headline, but behind it was years of resentment collapsing into silence. He thought he'd feel joy, victory, closure. But instead, there was a strange emptiness. A voice inside saying, "You didn't start this to destroy him. You started this to build yourself." Yet, another part of him smirked and whispered, "He destroyed himself when he doubted you." The next morning, Marco walked into Shake Shack headquarters, a sleek, glass-walled office buzzing with energy, walls covered in photos of their journey from cart to kingdom. His team greeted him like a hero. "Boss, London launch was insane," one said. "Dubai hit record sales," another added. Marco smiled, the kind of smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. They were winning on every front. They'd opened 50 stores across continents, each one blending the authenticity of his street hustle with a global edge. Custom menus, local collaborations, even special shakes inspired by regional flavors. Marco had turned a street cart dream into a billion-dollar brand, but he hadn't forgotten the grind. He still visited kitchens unannounced, still grilled burgers himself, reminding his staff that leadership wasn't about status. It was about smoke, sweat, and serving. Yet behind the success, a storm was brewing. Investors wanted more control, pushing for automation, cheaper meat, faster delivery, everything Marco once promised never to compromise. "We could triple profits if we cut costs," said Aaron, his new business partner. Marco's reply was calm but sharp. "If we cut integrity, we cut the brand. I built this from pain, not shortcuts." But pressure mounted. Emails piled up, shareholders grew impatient, and social media began painting Marco as stubborn, difficult, even old school. He didn't care. He had built Shake Shack to stand for authenticity, not greed. Then came the betrayal that shook him harder than Luis's. A leaked memo appeared online. Confidential franchise details, supplier names, recipes, private notes, all exposed. The world exploded in speculation. Reporters swarmed his stores, competitors mocked him, and fans demanded answers. Inside the chaos, Marco discovered the source. A trusted executive, someone he had mentored, had sold internal documents to rival chains for money. The betrayal cut deep, reopening wounds he thought had scarred over. For the first time in years, Marco felt that same lonely chill he'd felt the night Luis locked him out. He didn't lash out publicly. He went silent. He disappeared from the media, vanishing into the same city that once ignored him. For 2 months, no one knew where he was. Rumors swirled. Some said he'd quit, others that he'd sold the company. But truthfully, Marco had returned to the beginning, Madison Square Park. Late at night, hoodie pulled over his head. He stood, where his cart once stood, breathing in the smell of city air, the faint aroma of nearby food trucks, the noise of life continuing without pause. He realized something profound. He had spent years proving others wrong, but now the real challenge was proving himself right. One night, a food truck owner, a young woman struggling to keep her small taco stand alive, recognized him. She hesitated, then asked, "Are you him, the Shake Shack guy?" Marco smiled, nodding. "Was," he said. She laughed nervously, telling him about her struggles, her debts, how she loved cooking but hated business. Marco listened quietly, then helped her grill for the dinner rush, guiding her through timing, plating, energy. When they finished, she said softly, "You still love this, don't you?" That night changed something in him. He realized the empire had taken him away from the kitchen, the place where he was most alive. Over the next weeks, Marco began visiting small local vendors across the city, anonymously helping them improve menus, fix grills, design brands. Word spread quietly that a mysterious mentor was helping food trucks thrive, and soon, the ghost chef became a whispered legend. But when one vendor accidentally filmed him on TikTok, the internet exploded again. Marco Cruz returns trended for days. Fans flooded Shake Shack with messages begging him to come back. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he walked into his old restaurant, the original Shake Shack in Madison Square Park, before opening hours. The staff froze when they saw him. He simply asked for an apron. "Today," he said, "we cook old school." Cameras showed up later, of course. How could they not? But Marco didn't care. He flipped burgers, poured shakes, and greeted customers like the early days. That day reignited something in the public. They didn't just see a CEO, they saw a man reborn. Sales skyrocketed, brand reputation soared, and investors backed off. He took back full control of Shake Shack, buying out those who prioritized profit over principle. And to ensure no betrayal would ever destroy the culture again, he introduced a radical new policy: employee ownership. Every worker, from janitors to managers, would now own shares. "This isn't my empire anymore," Marco told the press. "It's ours." That move shocked the corporate world but inspired millions. The company's stock value doubled in months, proving that humanity could coexist with success. Yet one chapter still waited to close. Marco heard Luis was back, in New York, broke and working as a consultant for a minor restaurant chain. One afternoon, Marco walked into that restaurant unannounced. Luis froze when he saw him. Same eyes, older faces, 2 lifetimes apart. For a moment, the air was thick with unspoken years. Marco didn't yell, didn't gloat. He simply placed a Shake Shack bag on the table, inside one burger wrapped perfectly, and said, "That's the taste you said would never sell." Luis looked down, silent. Marco smiled faintly. "I don't need an apology," he said. "Just remember, dreams do pay rent if you work like hell for them." Then he walked out, leaving Luis in tears. That small act went viral after a customer recorded it, but Marco hadn't done it for publicity. He'd done it for closure. For the first time, revenge didn't taste like victory. It tasted like release. Over the following years, Shake Shack became more than a restaurant chain. It became a philosophy, a living example that failure was just fuel for innovation. Marco launched a foundation supporting young chefs from poor backgrounds, teaching not just cooking, but resilience, branding, and emotional strength. He traveled to schools, telling students, "Your scars are your secret recipes. Don't hide them. Cook with them." Every speech ended with the same words he'd once carved above his cart: "Born in the grind." The phrase turned into a global movement. Merchandise sold out. Celebrities quoted him. And yet, Marco still returned to that park, sometimes sitting quietly where it all began, watching the lines stretch around his restaurant, not with arrogance, but gratitude, because deep inside he knew the empire wasn't built on burgers. It was built on pain, on patience, on perseverance, and maybe that was always the real story, not of revenge, but of rebirth. The kid who once cooked in the rain now owned the skyline. But he never stopped feeling like that boy under the streetlight, clutching a dream that smelled like grilled beef and hope. As he watched new generations flip burgers in Shake Shack uniforms, laughing, hustling, dreaming, he smiled. The legacy was alive. And in the end, the world didn't remember the cousin who fired him. They remembered the man who turned betrayal into brand, hunger into empire, and pain into purpose. One continuous paragraph, no headings, no breaks, pure movie-style narration. Years later, the world had changed, but Marco Cruz hadn't lost his fire, only refined it. Shake Shack had become more than a fast food chain. It was a symbol of hustle culture, a living anthem for anyone who had ever been told, "You can't." Every city he opened a store in carried the same energy: warmth, authenticity, and rebellion wrapped in a burger bun. Fans lined up for hours just to take photos near the first shack. Influencers called it a religion. Yet Marco never stopped grinding. He was no longer chasing revenge. He was chasing impact. He had turned betrayal into a global movement. But with every success came a deeper realization. The empire could grow forever, but his time wouldn't. His once youthful face now carried faint lines of exhaustion, but behind those eyes still burned the spark of the street kid who refused to give up. The world had crowned him a billionaire, philanthropist, visionary, but to him he was still the guy flipping burgers under the rain. His foundation, born in the grind, now funded culinary scholarships in over 20 countries. Thousands of young chefs, inspired by his story, found their way out of poverty because of the opportunities he created. Every time one of them succeeded, Marco felt that same pride he'd once felt when his first customer smiled at that first burger. He had turned failure into fuel, pain into purpose, and yet something inside him still whispered, "What comes next?" The answer came unexpectedly. One autumn evening, Marco visited a local Shake Shack in Brooklyn without telling anyone. He sat in the corner, hoodie pulled up, watching as customers laughed, shared meals, and created memories around the food he once made by hand. A teenage employee caught his eye, a shy, lanky boy named Jonah, who reminded Marco of himself at 22. The kid moved fast, smiled at every customer, and worked twice as hard as everyone else. When the shift ended, Marco followed him outside and said, "You've got heart, kid." Jonah turned, startled, then recognized him. "Wait, you're Marco Cruz." Marco laughed softly. "I used to be." They talked for hours on a park bench, sharing fries and stories. Jonah confessed he dreamed of opening his own burger shop but couldn't afford culinary school. Marco listened quietly, then said, "You don't need a degree to cook. You need hunger." The next morning, Marco called his foundation director and arranged a full scholarship for Jonah, not because he saw potential, but because he saw fire. Jonah's journey reignited something in Marco. He remembered why he started this in the first place. Not for money, not for fame, but for moments like this, for the next kid who refused to give up. Months later, Jonah's small food truck, Grind and Grill, opened in Brooklyn. Marco stood in the crowd anonymously, watching the boy he mentored serve his first customer. When Jonah spotted him and mouthed, "Thank you," Marco simply nodded. That night, Marco went home feeling something he hadn't felt in years: peace. The world could take his fame, his fortune, his brand, but not his legacy. Because legacy wasn't about how much you built. It was about how much you passed on. Still, fate wasn't done testing him. A global economic crash hit, shaking industries across the board. Investors panicked, stores struggled, supply chains broke down. Shake Shack faced the toughest challenge since its creation. Competitors shut down overnight. Marco's advisors begged him to cut staff, close branches, save profits. But Marco stood in front of his board, hands firm on the table, and said, "We built this brand on loyalty. If we cut people now, we cut our soul." Against all logic, he refused to fire anyone. Instead, he personally funded wages for 3 months, even selling one of his penthouses to keep everyone employed. The news broke nationwide. Shake Shack CEO saves workers at his own cost. The public erupted in admiration. Customers flooded back, sales soared, and Marco once again proved that doing the right thing pays back in ways money can't measure. After the storm, the brand emerged stronger than ever. But Marco was tired, not in body but in spirit. He began thinking about stepping back, letting the next generation carry the torch. He started visiting kitchens again, not as a boss, but as a teacher. He'd stand behind new cooks, adjust their timing, and whisper, "Feel the rhythm," not the recipe. One evening, after closing time, he sat alone in the first Shake Shack, lights dimmed, hearing echoes of the past, his laughter, his anger, his hunger. On the counter was a framed photo of the original food cart, grease stains still visible. He picked it up, smiled, and whispered, "We did it." Just then, his assistant entered and told him a documentary crew wanted to film his life story. Marco declined. "No documentaries," he said. "Let the food tell the story." He didn't want to be remembered as a man on magazine covers. He wanted to be remembered through every burger, every shake, every smile. Years later, after he quietly retired, people still talked about him. Kids wore shirts that said "Grind never dies." Entrepreneurs quoted his lines. "Dreams don't cook themselves" became a slogan painted on walls. The young chefs he once helped grew up to run their own restaurants, some even franchising under Shake Shack itself. The legacy had multiplied beyond him, like flavors passed down through generations. In his final public appearance, Marco spoke at a culinary school graduation. Standing before hundreds of aspiring chefs, he said, "When they tell you it's impossible, remember, that's where the recipe starts. Failure isn't the end. It's the ingredient." The audience gave him a standing ovation. Cameras flashed, but Marco's eyes were misty. He saw himself in those faces. The same fire, the same hunger. He ended the speech with his last signature line. We're all born hungry. The question is, what will you cook with it? That night, after the ceremony, Marco walked to Madison Square Park alone. The city buzzed around him, but he heard only the soft hiss of memory, the grill, the rain, the laughter of strangers. He stopped at the spot where his first cart once stood, now paved over, but still sacred in his heart. Pulling a small Shake Shack bag from his coat, he unwrapped a single burger, took one slow bite, and smiled. He wasn't eating food, he was tasting time. A lifetime of hustle, heartbreak, and healing all folded into that one moment. Somewhere in the distance, a food truck horn honked, kids laughed, and the scent of grilled beef floated through the air. The world moved on, but Marco didn't need it to stop. He had written his name into its flavor forever. He didn't just build a brand, he built a belief system. He proved that revenge could become redemption, that broken dreams could feed millions, and that the hardest nights could turn into the brightest signs. And long after Marco Cruz was gone, Shake Shack's story lived on in every meal, every hand that cooked with love, every dream that refused to die. Because somewhere a new kid was being told, you can't. And someone, somewhere, was already flipping the script.